We would go to the beach often. We lived in Southern California. We'd go to the beach almost every day during the summertime. And there were people down there that would always say, do you have some spare change? You know, have you ever run into anybody like that? You have some spare change. I don't know I could never figure out what spare change was. You know, I knew change. You know, change is what I carried in my pocket and stuff. But spare change meant, I have an excess of money and I'd just love to give it to you. And I never quite got to that point where I had that kind of outlook on that. But I do remember thinking, yeah, I've got some change and I think I'd like to change you. I'd like to get you a job. I'd like to get you some self-reliance. I'd like to get you some of all this stuff. Now, how many of you have ever run into somebody that you'd like to change? You know, somebody, okay, don't look at them right now. But the truth of the matter is that we've all run into people that we would like to see have some change. Today we're going to be talking about that, but I want you to focus in on yourself, because I have learned in all of my many years of experience that the only person I can change is you guys. No, the only person I can really change is me. I've tried, Cindy is out with the kids today, and I've tried to change her for all the years we've been married. How successful have I been? I'm not successful at that at all. And it's a good thing, because I would have changed her from being who she is to somebody that I wanted her to be, and that would have been just a disaster. You know, usually our designs for other people are not very good. You know, we'd like to see them do this and that and blah, blah, blah. And usually it's kind of a self-serving desire that we have. And so we'd like to change people around us so that we feel better, so that we have more comfort, so that we have more stuff, so that we have whatever it is that we want to get them to change to provide for us. But God here today is going to share with us, in fact, the Apostle Paul, he's going to share with us in Ephesians chapter 4, we're going to be looking at verses 17 through 24, about how we change. How we change. And I'm going to read to you the passage of scripture that we have here. It begins in verse number 17. Paul says this, "Now this I say and testify in the Lord." What he's saying is, I'm going to tell you some stuff, but this is really a testimony to you from what God has given me. Now, how many of you have an opinion about just about everything? You know, I'm one of the most highly opinionated people in the world. In fact, how many of you have heard about the big NFL deal that's going on, with abuse and all that stuff? I have a lot of opinions about that. And I don't mind at work sharing all of those things. And it's kind of funny, because we have one guy that's a real sports fanatic, and he asked me, "Mike, what's your opinion about this?" And I remember thinking, when he asked me about my opinion, I said, "I've got one, and I'm going to share it with you, but I don't know that I should, because what's my opinion matter?" But Paul here says, I have an opinion, and it really comes from the Lord. He's going to testify to us about what the Lord has told him. So this opinion carries some weight. And he goes on, he says, that you must no longer walk as the Gentiles do. Now, how many of you know who a Gentile is? Okay, how many of you are Gentiles? Well, kind of. We all are Gentiles, because Paul was talking about Gentiles here in the term that says people that are not Jewish. Now, really, as you read the New Testament, anybody who is not a believer in Christ would be considered a Gentile here. Not a believer in Christ, not a follower of Jesus Christ would be a Gentile. So most of you are not Gentiles. Okay, now, that you must no longer walk as the Gentiles do. And here he's going to describe how they walk. Now, when it says walk, what he means is how they conduct life, how they live life. And so he says this. He says, in the futility of their minds. Okay? In other words, their thought processes aren't quite right. And it comes to futile ends. Have you ever used your head and come up with an opinion, come up with an idea, and you realize, that's really dumb? Okay, yeah, I've been there. In fact, I've had some of those opinions this last week. It's futile. It doesn't cause anything to change. It doesn't cause anything to become more like what it was created to be. So it's all futile. We can do a lot of stuff in our nation here, but if it doesn't cause our nation to become more like what it's supposed to be, it's futile. Okay? Have you ever thought about how you spend money? Okay, let's just take that. How do you spend money? How you spend money is supposed to make a difference, right? It should make a difference for you. It should make a difference for whoever you spend it on. It should make a difference. But how many of you have ever spent money and it just didn't do anything? I've done that. Just didn't do anything. It was futile. It didn't produce the end result that is desired. Okay, so it says in verse 18, they are darkened in their understanding. Okay, when you repeat behavior often enough, okay, when you have a thought process that keeps going and going and going, and you keep thinking, if I do it again, you know how they define lunacy? Doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting different results. Now, what was happening here with the Gentiles is that they had this thought process, and the thought process was XYZ, and it always produced this result. Well, gee, I'm going to go back. I'm going to think XYZ again, and it produces this result. Oh, no. I'm going to go back, and I'm going to think XYZ, and it produces this result. Now, when you keep doing that, pretty soon you think nothing's going to change. No matter how I think, no matter what I do, it's always going to end up with this. So that's what happens in this next step in verse number 18. They're darkened in their understanding. Pretty soon you just get to the point where you say, nothing's going to change, so I just give up. Okay, it's futile, and therefore I'm just going to end up being darkened in my understanding. Now, they were alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them. Now, how many of you have thought all of the right thoughts all of your life? Okay. Anybody here? Nah, we don't think the right thoughts all the time, do we? So what happens is that we get darkened in our understanding. Pretty soon we think there is no solution to the problem. There is no solution to the way I'm thinking. There is no end result that I desire. And so therefore I get darkened in my understanding, and then I get alienated from the life of God because I don't think that God can do anything about it. In our world today, that is one of the biggest problems that we have. From the get-go, the way people think is that there is no God. There is no God. We're products of evolution. We're here just by happenstance. It's just a chaotic thing, and we just happen to come from nothing, and all of a sudden we have this ability to communicate with each other, love each other, see each other, do all this stuff with each other, and it just happened. There is no God. So now, when you get to that point, you get darkened in your understanding, you get alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to their hardness of heart. The hardness of heart says there is no God, so therefore he can't come up with a solution. Now, in verse 19, they have become callous because over and over again, have you ever noticed when you do labor with your hands and you do the same thing over and over again, you get calluses? You might not know that. Yikes, I forgot what I was doing here. But in the old days, when people actually worked with their hands and stuff, they would work and they would get calluses on their hands. And what did that callus do? It reduced the sensitivity to feel. Okay, you get calluses on your hands and you can't feel stuff anymore. You feel pressure, but you don't feel the sensitivity like you would without them. So they're giving themselves up to sensuality, greed, to practice every kind of impurity, okay, because of this callousness of heart. So they try to substitute. But that is not the way you learned Christ. Now the good news. Verse 21. Assuming that you have heard about him and were taught in him, as the truth is in Jesus, to 22, put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life, and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, created after the likeness of God, in true righteousness and holiness. Okay, now you might not have discovered it, and you might not have seen it, but right there was the steps to change. But let's take a look, first of all, at the description of our life before Christ. In verses 17 through 19, notice what happens here. First of all, we have this need for significance. We have this need to feel like we're useful. We have this need to feel like we're recognized for something good. And every one of us has that created in them. And you know why I know that you have that? Because you've been created in the image of God. And being created in the image of God, you have this thing in you that says, there's something important that I need to do. There's something important that I can be. There's something important that I can help people with. There's some important task that I have to do. Because we're created in the image of God. Now, what was God's major thing that he wanted to do? If you had to say, God was after one thing, what would it be? After creation, what happened? Adam and Eve, right? And what did Adam and Eve do? They sinned, okay? Okay, the fall of mankind. And since that time, everybody is born with this desire to be selfish and to do things that are good for me. Okay? Now, what from that point on was God all about? Redemption. Redemption. Now, redemption is a church word, okay, but I want you to know what it means. Redemption means to be bought back or to have something done for you that makes you like what you were created to be. Okay, so God sent Jesus to die on a cross to pay the penalty for the sinfulness of mankind, and he used his son Jesus as the payment so that you could be bought back and be made like you were originally created to be. Now, let's be honest. How many of us are exactly like what we are originally created to be? None of us. Okay, let's be honest. We're all in the same boat. I'm in the same boat with you. So because of that, Paul has given us this passage here to help us understand this change process. Okay, so you have a need for significance. You have a mission in life to accomplish. Okay, the second thing is we don't know how to achieve it, do we? You know, left to our own devices, I got this thing in me that says, man, I could be great. I could be the image of God. I could be a reflection of who he is. I have this thing in me because it's created in me. I was created in the image of God, but I just don't know how to achieve it. I don't know how to achieve this significance. I don't know how to achieve helping people. I don't know how to achieve my destiny in life. I just don't know how to do that. And so left to our own devices, here's what we do. We try substitutes. Okay, have you ever tried to substitute? You know, you have this need for significance, and so therefore, how do you show your significance? How do people in our world today show that they are significant people? Number one way is how? Get rich. Okay, money. Okay, and I hope I put that one first. I did. Lucky for us. Way to go, General. Money. Because we evaluate people's worthiness. We evaluate their contribution to the world based on their wealth. Okay, and we get caught up in that, don't we? Why do you work? Because you enjoy it? I see a lot of shaking heads. You know, no, we don't work because we enjoy it. Why do we work? We work to get money. We work to get money because we enjoy the profit of whatever it is that our money buys us, right? We enjoy that. Now, some of you do enjoy your jobs, don't you? Please, in there some part of your job you enjoy. I like my job on Sunday. But money is the one substitute we get because we think that brings us significance. You know, Howard Hughes was one of those guys. And Howard Hughes built this huge empire. Just a hugely wealthy man. Had so much money that he could build these plywood airplanes and fly them off the ocean. And it was just craziness. But he had so much wealth. And he was interviewed one time. And he was asked, Howard, how much is enough? And you would think he would say, oh, I've got enough, you know, I can coast through life now and never have to work another day in my life because I've got all the money in the world. But you know what he said? He said, a little bit more. A little bit more. Because money, no matter how much money we get, it's never enough to satisfy that thing within us that says, I need to be significant. So we try something else. Relationships. You know, if I could be important to someone, you know, if I could be important to Cindy, that would be the end all and be all of all that I am. She would say, Mike, you're such a wonderful man. You're such a wonderful husband. You're such a wonderful provider. You're such a wonderful confidant. You're such a wonderful person. You're so wonderful. And I would just go, I have arrived. But you know, even though she does all of those things, that's a time for laughter. Even though somebody could do all of those things for you, you know what? It wouldn't satisfy you. It wouldn't satisfy your significance because it's a substitute. Number 3, we try work. You know, if I could just be known for something, if I could just achieve something, if I could have enough credentials where people would recognize my value, I would be significant. And you can have all of that stuff that you want. You can work hard. You can abandon your family. You can abandon your children. You can do all the stuff and just work. And at the end of all of that, you might get somebody that says, man, you're a hard worker. But in the end, you're going to look back and see all the stuff you traded. That you traded to get that one person to say, you know, you're a valuable person. And therefore, you would say, I don't know that it was worth it. I never see anybody on their deathbed say, you know what, I wish I'd spent a few more hours working each day. You know what I hear people say? I hear them say, I wish I'd spent more time with my family. I wish I'd spent more time with the people I love. I wish I had more time with people. So when we get to this work thing, remember that it may get you a little pat on the back every now and then, but the reality is, in the end, you're going to say, it's a substitute for what I was really created to be. So let's take a look at how change is produced. Now, what were you created to be? Let's define that first. What were you created to be? Now, I look at my life and I say, I was created to be a husband to Cindy. I was created to be a father to my children. I was created to be a grandfather to my grandchildren. I was created to be a pastor. Okay, I was created to be, this one's hard for me to even get out of my mouth. I was created to be a used car salesman. I don't know. I think that might be just an aberration of what God really intended. But nonetheless, that's what I do. And so therefore, I was created to be all of those things. Now, how many of you would define yourself based on what you do? Most of us. Most of us would define ourselves based on what we do. But I want you to recreate yourself today. And I want you to think about yourself in terms of who you are, not what you do. Now, what kind of character do you possess? What is inside of you? Because when we start defining ourselves based on what we do, some of us would say, I'm a father. Will I ever not be a father? Yeah, I'll never not be a father. I'm a father today. I'll be a father tomorrow. I have grown children, but I'm still a father, aren't I? However, my role as father is much different. I'm more of a consultant now. I used to be a strict disciplinarian. I used to be the king of my castle, and now that role has changed, hasn't it? And so I'm not really the dad that I used to be. So our roles change. And when our children leave home, we go through this crisis, as parents. And we say, oh no, now, who do I father now? And so I start fathering Cindy. And she doesn't like that all that much. And I have to realize, no, I'm not really her dad. And she reminds me of that often. But my role gets messed up, okay? My role gets messed up. So when we start defining ourselves, let's start defining ourselves in terms of who God says we are. Number one, I will always be a child of God. Okay, let me back up a little bit. Strike that, and I will edit that out on the tape. We are always creations of God. Okay, we have been created by God. Every one of us in this room has been created by God. We're not products of evolution. We were not conjured up just because our parents decided to have some children. Okay, we are creations of God. So therefore, that places us under the ownership of the one who created us, correct? God owns us. Whether we submit to him or not, God owns us because he created us. Now, we can rebel and we can fight him, and we don't have to cooperate with him and live independently from him to our own peril. However, we'll always be creations of God. Now, there comes a point in time where God gives us an opportunity to go from that relationship, being a creation of God, to becoming a child of God. Now, get this straight, because not everybody in the world is a child of God. Now, God has gone through this process, and he has sent his son Jesus to die for all of mankind, but he gives us the choice of whether he adopts us or not. Okay? In the New Testament, the word adoption is really pretty prevalent. God adopts us. And I remember as a kid thinking, adopted kids they kind of lose out a little bit. They don't quite have the thing that I have with my parents. And I remember my sister, all of a sudden, when I was about 9 years old, she was much older. She was 12. And as a 12-year-old, she thought she was mom now. And she would always, babysit me. And when my parents were gone, she would always plant this seed in my head. If I would mess up, do something like a 9-year-old would do, and she was a much more mature 12-year-old, she would look down her nose at me and she would say, "You're adopted." I don't know if you ever had that experience with your siblings or not, but she would say, "You're adopted." And I go, oh man, that would just bother me. No, I'm not adopted. I don't think maybe I'm adopted. My head would go through that process. And so I would go on, and then a couple of weeks later, she would remind me again. I'd do something a 9-year-old would typically do, and she would look down her nose again at me and say, "You're adopted. You're not really connected to me. Don't embarrass me in front of my friends." And I'd say, "Oh man, maybe I'm adopted. I don't know. Maybe I'm adopted." And it bothered me and bothered me and bothered me. And pretty soon, I got to be 10 years old. And as a 10-year-old, I was much brighter than I was as a 9-year-old. So I remember my sister saying to me, she was now 13, and she says to me, "You're adopted." And I remember saying to her, "I know. Mom and Dad had to have you. They chose me." To which she smacked me and said, and I said, and she said, and we did all that thing because we were very mature 10 and 13-year-olds. But my point is this, is that God has given us the opportunity to be adopted because He chose us. He chose you. I don't know if you ever know what it was to feel like as a 7th grader and to go to PE for the first time, and I remember we had to change clothes. And I remember with great fear and trepidation, I entered the locker room and changed clothes and went out for PE. And I was feeling, at that time it was 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. And PE was a conglomeration of all those grades. And I remember going out there and the 9th graders were the king of the castle. And they were always the team captains at PE. And they would pick sides. And I could always remember, man, I hope this guy knows my skills. I hope they realize who I am. I hope they know how sporting I am. I hope they know how athletic I am, because I don't want to be chosen last. And they would always pick you, and they would get down to about 6 or 8 guys left, and they would not even choose them. They would just say, okay, you take those guys, I'll take these guys. Because they were all at the bottom of the barrel. And you never wanted to be the bottom of the barrel. You wanted to be picked. You wanted to be chosen. And that's what God has done for us. He has chosen us to be what? His children. His children. Now, you get to cooperate in that. You can decline the adoption. You can say, no thanks. I want to declare my independence and I'm going to be my own thing. You can do that. Or you can say, yeah, I want to be part of God's family. Now that's what God has chosen you to be, as one of His children. You need to cooperate with that. It's your choice. We believe in free will choice. And therefore God gives you the free will choice to be part of His kingdom or not. And so therefore God has chosen you, number one, to be His children. And He needs to redeem you in order to make you that way, because right now, when we're born independent from God, because that's what our sinfulness has done. Okay? So now let's take a look how change is produced. And I'm going to be drawing your attention to the passage of Scripture here. Number one, reject self-pity. The first thing you do is reject self-pity. Now remember, you were born to be significant. And how many times have you ever asked yourself the question, why haven't I achieved this? Why have I not achieved success? Why don't I have money? Why don't I have recognition? Why don't I have all of this stuff? And sometimes we even get to the point where we blame God. Have you ever blamed God for not having what you need? What you think you need, or what you think you deserve? And we blame God. God, why did you leave me out? Why did you leave me hung out to dry, so to speak? And really, that's a form of self-pity. Self-pity says, I deserve something and I don't have it. That's why so many people in the world today say, I deserve success in life. I don't have it. Therefore, I'm going to work hard. I'm going to get money. I'm going to have relationships with people who think I'm the king of the castle. They substitute this redemption by God for all of this other stuff that is prevalent in the world today. So reject self-pity. Ephesians 4:20 through 22 says that. But that is not the way you learned Christ. And remember, he's talking about the Gentiles and their former way of life. That's not the way you learned Christ, assuming that you have heard about him and were taught in him as the truth is in Jesus. Okay, now, he says, assuming a couple of things here. Number one, that you've heard about Jesus. Okay, so today, most of us, I'm going to say all of us in this room, have heard about Jesus. Jesus, and what he wants us to know is that Jesus came to earth to show us who God is. Have you ever wondered what God is like? If I could just be in the presence of God. Remember, Moses says, I want to see you, God. And God says, and he knows, man, if I ever saw God, I would just probably disintegrate. And so God says, okay, I'm going to hide you in the cleft of this rock, and I'm going to slide by, and you're just going to see a glimpse of me. And man, that was enough for him. Okay, he saw a glimpse of God passing by. Now, most of us want to see God, don't we? We want to know what God is like. So God said, I understand that. And I'm going to send this person, Jesus. He is me. And I'm going to send him. He's going to be born as a baby. He's going to grow up as a young man. He's going to die as an adult. and I'm going to show you who I am. And he went through life and he did some miracles. He loved people. He ministered to people. He touched their lives. He showed us who God is and what God is all about. Now, Jesus was all about redemption as well. And so he dies at the end of his life to provide forgiveness of sin. Now, that's what Paul's talking about here. The way you learned Christ, assuming that you've heard about him and were taught in him as the truth is in Jesus. Now, here's what he says. To put off your old self. Okay, to put off your old self. Now, what's our old self? Our old self is self-pity. Why don't I have? Why can't I achieve? Why doesn't God do this? Why don't I? Okay, that's self-pity. So he says, put off your old self. Now notice what it says. Put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through what? Deceitful desires. Our old self wants stuff. It wants recognition. It wants money. It wants fame. It wants all of the stuff. And what does he say? He says that's deceitful. That's not what you were created for. You weren't created for all of that stuff to be recognized by man. You were created to be a child of God. So therefore, don't get mixed up here. Put off that old stuff and realize that I wasn't created for that. And he says there's a step 2 here. And I'm hoping, there we go. Realize the truth. Okay? Put off self-pity, all of that stuff that your former way of life tells you about, and put on the truth. And it says in verse 23, and to be renewed in the spirit of your mind. You know how to find truth? The truth is not through thinking. The truth is renewing the way you think and the conclusions you arrive at. Remember, who is the truth? Jesus is the truth. We saw that in the former verse, right? Jesus is the truth. So the more I know about Jesus, the more I know what was important to him, the more I know of how he related to other people, the more I know of what his goal in life is, the more of the truth I will know. And I can renew my mind. So when I go to work tomorrow, actually Tuesday, when I go to work Tuesday, what is my goal? Is my goal to make money? Not so much. Good thing, because I don't do very well. But, no, I do okay. I really do okay. But the truth of the matter is that I go to work because I get to influence people so that they can know more about what Jesus is like. Okay? How I treat them, how I treat my coworkers, how I treat my boss, how I treat the clients that come in, the customers that I serve, the more I treat them like Christ, the better job I do. And it has nothing to do with making more money. It's not a kind of a thing that's, oh man, I could make more money if I treated them like Jesus. That's the wrong idea. The wrong idea totally. The idea is I treat them like Jesus because they are creations of God too. And they need to know who he is. So therefore, that's why I treat them the way that I do. Now, I've run into some of your friends that come to my dealership, and they come to buy a car. And I'm very careful about the way I treat those people, because they'll tell you about me. Now, I'm careful about the way I treat all of them. But there are people that I tell them, you shouldn't buy a car. Even though I could sell them a car and make some money, I tell them, you shouldn't buy a car. What you should do is get your car repaired. Because you're taking a $2,000 fix for your car and you're extending that into an $18,000 payment. Don't do that. And they appreciate that every now and then. And they've never told my boss. So that's a good thing too, because I would probably get fired. But realize the truth. Now, the truth for me is that I'm not there to make money. The truth there is to treat them like Jesus would treat them. And help them, not just if they need a car to get them a car, but to help them with their totality of life. There are people that want, how many of you have ever wanted a car and couldn't afford a car? Okay? Have you ever done that? Yeah. And so it's my job as a follower of Jesus Christ to tell you, you probably shouldn't buy a car. You're going to be a slave to this car. In fact, the car that you love right now, in 6 months you're going to hate. Because you're just making payments. And you hate it, and you hate it, and I even take it a little step further. And then when you start hating the car, you know who else you're going to hate? Me. That guy talked me into buying a car, and I shouldn't have bought a car. Okay, now, I say all of that to say that when I go to work, that's my job, is to show people who Jesus is. So realize the truth and be renewed in the spirit of your mind. When I go to work, I used to think, I got to make money. 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 Not so much now. I have to show people who Jesus is. Okay, and if I make money, and let me say this, whose responsibility is it to provide for me financially? God. And he does. He does an incredibly good job at that. Okay, so realize the truth. There's a third thing here. Oh, wait a minute. Before we do that, Romans 12:2 says this, and this is another writing of Paul, and it's the same kind of theme here. He says, don't be conformed to this world. Now, if you have a Phillips translation Bible, when it says don't be conformed to this world, what it will say there is don't be squeezed into the world's mold. What's the world's mold when it comes to money? The more you have, the better you are. The more you have, the better you are. That's the world's mold. Okay, and when I go to work, I'm being pressured by my bosses. You need to sell more cars. And I'm reminded, you're only as good as your last sale. And I'm reminded, I got to be at the top of the leaderboard here, or people are not going to think highly of me. I've got to compete with these other guys. I have to hurry. I have to sell some cars. I have to cheat, steal, and lie. That's the world's mold. And Paul says, don't be squeezed into that. He says, don't be conformed, don't be squeezed into this world's mold, but be transformed. Be a different person. Be a different person by the renewal of your mind. Think differently. Don't think like the world thinks. Think like Jesus thinks. By testing, you may discern what the will of God, what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Okay, and you're going to test it. You're going to say, okay, well, today I'm not going to be all consumed with making money, for example, for me. I'm going to be consumed with showing these people who Jesus is. And it's amazing what happens when you do that. It's transformative because it makes you think differently. And this thinking differently causes you to act differently. Now, have you ever wondered why you do what you do? I'm going to just tell you in a nutshell. It's because you want to. You want to. That's why you do what you do. You want to. Most of us do what we want to do. Now, what happens is that we start believing certain things. Okay, believing certain things. Okay, so we say, okay, well, if my job is to make money, I believe that's my job to make money, and so therefore I start believing certain things, and so I start feeling like, I need to make more money, and so therefore I need to maybe fudge the truth a little bit because I could make a sale if I fudge the truth a little bit. Okay, so I fudge the truth a little bit, and then I get the sale, and I go, that's kind of reaffirming, and so it reaffirms that I should cheat a little bit. Well, transforming the way you think is saying, okay, I'm here to represent Jesus, and so therefore whether I make a sale or not is secondary, and will be completely under his control. And so therefore I'm going to treat you like Jesus would treat you. You have a great experience. You say, man, this was the greatest buying experience I've ever had. That reinforces that. Now, what happens here is that we prove what the will of God is. That's the important thing here. When you change the way you think, you change the way you feel, and you'll change what you do. Okay, so start with the thinking part first. Think differently. Renew your mind. Think like Jesus thinks. You'll feel differently about people. Rather than objects to be used, they're people to be assisted and helped. People to be ushered into the kingdom. People to be introduced to Christ. And so therefore, you'll do different things. See what I mean? Okay, so that's what Paul's saying here. You'll discern what is the will of God, and notice what the will of God is. It's always good, acceptable, and perfect. Have you ever had an encounter with someone, maybe in the workplace or maybe just in the neighborhood, and you just go, that was perfect. That's just what I needed to do there. Okay, that's what Paul's talking about here, having that kind of experience. Now, number 3, I have to retrain my response. Now, one thing I've kind of glossed over here, and that is in this first step, the first step that says reject self-pity. If you look at the Greek translation of, well, actually it was originally written in Greek. So if you look at the Greek writing of the New Testament, and I don't know if you know much about Greek, but the Greek verbs have a tense, past, present, future, that kind of thing, but they're far more elaborate than our English system. And it has a mood, and it has a tone to it, okay? And so all of this stuff goes together to tell you that this verb here, when it says reject self-pity, and it says put off your old self, that's a job that you do. Okay, and it's a one-time job. Okay, you put off your old self. You make a decision. Now, for most of us, we have to be reminded that we already put off our old self, okay, because that old self wants to creep back on you, okay? And so, put off your old self. Make a decision. You make a decision. A lot of people think, well, just let go and let God, you know? And if it is to be, it's up to Him, and I'll just let whatever happens. If it happens, it must be God's will. And have you ever heard anybody say that? If it happens, it's God's will. You know, and I run into people all the time that say, well, you know, I'll tell them, I say, now this is a very popular car here. And so if you don't decide to buy it today, and they think I'm twisting their arm, but I'm really just telling them the truth, it might not be here tomorrow when you come back. And that has happened numerous times. And they say, well, if it is to be, it'll be here. You know, and I always say, well, if it is to be and you never pull the trigger, you know, if you never decide to say yes, does that mean that whatever happens is supposed to happen? They go, well, yeah. I say, well, tell me about the Twin Towers. Was that supposed to happen? Well, no, not that. That doesn't count. You know, so just because something happens, my point is this, just because something happens does not mean that that's God's perfect choice. Okay? I don't get a lot of nods of approval yet, so I'm going to keep going. Now, in your situation, in your life, have you ever sinned? Done something that you know God didn't want you to do? Anybody ever do that? Okay, so now, because that happened, does that mean God wanted it to happen? No. Sometimes small things in the world happen. It doesn't thwart God's ultimate plan of redemption. It doesn't change all of that stuff. But what it does do is it causes us to be in rebellion to God. So therefore, just because things happen doesn't mean that God wants them to happen, nor desired them to happen, nor designed them to happen. He might allow them to happen because of our own self-will, but that's a different situation. Now, so reject self-pity is something that you do. You make a decision. Okay, I'm going to reject self-pity. I'm going to reject all of this woe is me stuff. I'm going to reject why don't I have this? And I am now going to go to the second one. The second one, notice it was realize the truth. Now, if you look at the verbiage around that and you look at the verbs, the Greek verbs there, that's something that God does in you. Okay, He guides you to the truth. Okay, so let God have freedom there. It will require your cooperation. But now we come to this third one, and the third one is retrain my response. Now, the Greek verbs there are going to indicate to you this is your job again. Okay, this is your job to retrain your thinking because now you know the truth. So therefore, retrain the way you respond. In Ephesians 4:24, and to put on the new self. Put on your new self. You know what people see most about you? They don't see you, do they? They see your clothes. Let's all be thankful for that, okay? Let's give God a round of applause there. Because they see our clothes, not us. Now, Paul's using that to show that you take off your old stuff, you put on something new so that you can be different, okay? Because we have the truth now. In Ephesians 4:24, and put on the new self. Now notice what this new self is. Created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. True righteousness and holiness. When you see people that have had the change that Paul's describing here, what you'll see is true righteousness and holiness. Now what is righteousness? Let's define that so that you know how to exhibit that, because your job is to retrain your responses so that you act righteously and holy. Okay, number one, define righteousness here. Put it down in your outline there. I didn't make a fill-in, so this is extra notes. Okay, retrain your response by acting righteously. Righteous means I am rightly related to God. Number one, I'm rightly related to God. Now, you know how you get rightly related to God? Through forgiveness. Our sin, remember, causes a distance between us and God. And forgiveness restores that distance. He doesn't reject us. He doesn't quit loving us. But it does create distance. Have you ever noticed that when you do something wrong to a coworker or a family friend or a family member, you kind of avoid them a little bit? You say, I know I did this. I said this about them, so I don't want to be around them. That's what it is with God. We sometimes create distance when we do those kinds of things. So there's distance that is created. Now, this forgiveness restores that distance. Now we can be close to God through forgiveness. Second thing that righteousness means is, because I'm closely related to God now, because I'm connected to Him through forgiveness, I do right things to other people. Because of my relationship with God, and I do righteousness in the workplace, means I can't lie, cheat, or steal. Okay? Because I'm rightly related with God. If I lie, cheat, or steal with you when it comes to buying a car, then I'm messing up my relationship with God, right? Okay? Because I'm not doing what He's asked me to do. I'm not representing Him to the world. So therefore, it causes me to do right with the people of the world. Okay? Rightly related to God, doing right to the people that I encounter. Okay, so that's righteousness. Holiness. The holiness means that I am set apart for God's purpose. Okay? Righteousness and holiness. When I encounter people, I'm set apart for God's purpose to interact in their lives. They come and they do whatever. They buy a car. They come to my house for dinner. They do whatever social occasion. I am now there because I'm representing God. I'm set apart for Him in every area of my life. Okay? Does that make sense? That's how we change. We put off the old self. We say, okay, it's not about me anymore, and it's not about my self-pity and why I don't have stuff. We retrain our minds to think like Christ thinks, and then we retrain our response to react the way He would. Remember the old bracelets, WWJD? What would Jesus do? That's what it's all about.